Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. Let's get ready for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors, and in this case, an Albany Bureau Chief. And we try to find out what's going on. And then in our second segments, we do writers and performers and artists. And this evening, in our second segment, we're going to talk about a movie that has taken the attention of one of the mental health institutions in the Bronx. So we're going to deal with that. But right now, we're going to talk to an old friend and colleague, and he is now the Albany Bureau Chief at the New York Daily News. So let us bring on Denis Slattery. Nice to see you once again, Denis.
Gary, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Just so I can really connect the dots here, Denis worked in the Bronx Bureau of the New York Daily News when they had a Bronx Bureau. So that's how we got to know each other after all these years. Anyway, you wrote about poverty and unemployment based on a controller report by Tom DiNapoli, the New York State Controller. So why don't you just give us the background of the report, and then we'll break it down, because there were some very striking numbers about the Bronx.
Sure. So the gist of the report, Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli, as you said, he issued a report last month in December, kind of looking at poverty rates statewide. And it really kind of came down to showing that New York State as a whole has a higher poverty rate than the rest of the country post-pandemic. And within those numbers, we saw that the Bronx continues to have one of the highest poverty rates in the state. And if you look at the numbers, the overall numbers for the state, it was around 14%, I believe, double check. And for the state, it was 24%. So it's much higher than the rest of the state.
Wow.
This is something that's been an ongoing issue for years, even though we've seen poverty fall over the past decade.
Right, and let's be clear: is that you wrote an article about it with the headline which caught my attention right away. Nearly 14% of all New Yorkers live in poverty, with the most in the borough of the Bronx, and this was in early December. And there's some of the numbers. The Bronx remains the highest poverty rate at 24%. Why do you think that is? That the unemployment, or is it just very obvious if you tie poverty to unemployment and to people out of work for the pandemic, and of course the health issues? I mean, is it just very obvious why that happens?
I think you kind of touched on some of those points. One of the other reports that Comptroller DiNapoli issued at the end of the year also looked at unemployment rates, and one of the things he found was that young people of color are struggling more than others trying to find employment. So I believe he had said more than 2 years after kind of the height of the pandemic, younger New Yorkers are still facing double-digit unemployment, as we've seen the number overall unemployment has fallen nationwide. But in the city, unemployment between 16 and 24-year-olds stands around 18% in the 5 boroughs. So that's a huge part of, I believe, the poverty issue as well.
You, as I mentioned earlier, had covered the Bronx extensively. So unlike maybe some other places, you pretty much know firsthand what we're talking about. How do we dig out of this? I mean, yes, we know the pandemic happened, but there are Bronx businesses right now saying, looking to hire, say, we need workers right there on the signs in front of their cash registers. And yet it seems disconnected that all these young men, I wouldn't care if it's young men, young women, but people are out of work. I'm not figuring this out.
There's definitely a disconnect there. It's very hard to kind of see. That's something that we're seeing nationwide as well. The unemployment numbers being low, I think there's still this kind of disconnect post-pandemic where employers are seeking to hire, but you have things like the minimum wage and other issues like that where people are still kind of looking. I think I'm not sure how to put that the best way, but there's also other things that are being done though to kind of combat poverty as far as like the Albany side of this. We've got some state lawmakers who have put out different measures kind of modeled on the lapsed child tax credit that we saw. Was a federal thing that was instituted over the past couple of years, doubling the federal child tax credit. A couple of state lawmakers have proposed doing it on the state level. So you'd be able to you
Oh,
basically see a reauthorization of a child tax credit where families in New York would receive monthly checks, roughly about $300 per child. That's something that a lot of people have said really helped a lot of families post pandemic and kind of getting back on their feet.
in order to get those things, I mean, what you have said is a really good example of the kind of thing that might help. But from a political perspective, and you're up there in Albany, so you know who's saying what. Let's, while I realize the poverty numbers in the Bronx are startling, let's not pretend that every rural area outside of New York City in New York State, from an economic standpoint, is doing well. I mean, I've spent some time in some of the upstate towns where, doing visiting and other things, and things don't look that great up there. That sort of thing would help those people too, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but to me that sounds like a reasonable suggestion. Uh, uh, Democrats going to be able to push these things through? You feel like the governor is behind?
It's going to be very interesting. The governor's talked a lot about affordability the last couple of weeks as she
Yes.
gets ready for her state of the state. I think when you're looking specifically at the Bronx, you're also talking about generational wealth gaps too, which play a big part in this.
Very good.
And as you mentioned, some upstate rural communities, you have seen smaller towns on decline over the past, couple of decades. But the Bronx is kind of a different story where you have people who have been in poverty for a couple of generations, and that's very hard for people to get out of. So these things like
That is.
the child tax credit and other things like that really could help families kind of get over that hump and kind of
Yeah,
find a
your
way home.
analysis there is really, really smart, I think. I mean, the idea that it's very easy to say, okay, your family, you grew up in a family that didn't have a lot and had to struggle, and could be any number of issues that have uh, laid a foundation of poverty. It's very easy to say, well, now go do this, whereas other people have kind of a head start in that way. I could see it. And listen, we're two white guys, but there's a racial component in there,
100%. Yeah.
undeniably. Um, we have another article about unemployment rate falling below 10% for the first time in 6 years in the Bronx. I don't know if Anderson has that. We could put that up. That was September 23rd, 2014, written by the Daily News. Talk to me a little bit about that space between 2014 and now 8 years later. The Bronx was doing so well. What were and you were covering it. What were the elements in there that kind of allowed it to happen? I wonder if we could duplicate that in some form, even though the dynamics are different.
Sure. I think going back to kind of my days covering the Bronx, and you and I spoke about this, there was a lot of investment in the Bronx over the past, 10 to 15 years. We saw um, the new mall open up in the East Bronx. There's a
The
lot of
Bay
investment.
Plaza, the Bay Plaza. It's funny because people just know it now. They don't realize that one day there was not a Bay Plaza. That's how
So
long we've been doing this.
it's been a while. So you have businesses like that. There's been other investments that we've seen in the South Bronx, and a lot of changes happening. Obviously in the Mott Haven and Melrose areas. I think at that time, the state overall was moving towards lower unemployment, and the Bronx obviously was the when you have an area that has a more significant unemployment poverty rate, those little
Mhm.
changes make a big difference. So
Yeah, and listen, I don't recall the exact date that the minimum wage was established, and again, that's the kind of thing. It's interesting. I know that there's some movement to have the minimum wage get up to 20% in New York. Of course, other states are struggling with much lower numbers, which is pretty frustrating to see. I wonder if that had some impact as well on but again, I'm just thinking about what you said about going back generationally for people who you know if they came from a place of poverty, the pandemic made it worse and makes that much harder to move to the next step. Just since we had touched on it, do you feel how did you feel about the governor's inaugurational address there. There's a lot going on up there. Do you think that, for example, her nomination for the chief judge is going to pass?
So it's very interesting. So Governor Hochul winning a narrow victory. She's now going to be dealing with a supermajority of fellow Dems in the state legislature, but you do have a large progressive component in the legislature. She didn't offer a lot of policy ideas in the inauguration. It was much more celebration of her win and kind of this historic moment of having the first woman elected governor of New York.
Right,
but
I get that, sure.
the next couple of weeks, we're going to see a lot more policy coming out. So we've got the state of the state coming up in about a week, and the governor will lay out kind of her policy agenda there. She's talked a lot about affordability, a lot about housing,
right,
rezoning.
I just want to go back to that chief judge thing, because those issues will reveal themselves over time and they will be debated in the legislature. But this right away, I got some material of a dozen, maybe a long list of a dozen prominent Hispanic legislators who were for it. And then on the other side, there was a pretty long list of prominent elected officials who were saying, we're not going to vote this way. There's a pretty big pull right now. You have no prognostication about it? That's not fair. I know.
No, I'll definitely touch on that. So it's that's going to be kind of the first really big battle between the legislature and the government.
Yeah,
so
that's going to tell a lot.
Oh, absolutely. So she nominated Judge Hector LaSalle. He currently is presiding judge in the Second Court of Appeals to be the next chief judge of the state of New York. This really sets up a big battle. As you said, there's about a dozen Democrats in the state Senate where his nomination has to be confirmed.
What are those numbers? They need how many senators to vote yes?
So 11. They could lose 11. So they're already at a point where they could stop the confirmation.
You know what's ironic, Dennis? This is somewhat off the trail here, and we only have a moment left. But what's ironic is that the pull in the House of Representatives to get a new speaker mirrors this, literal mirror, because it's the opposite party, that there's an extreme wing, so to speak, that's pulling in one direction and not letting kind of the status quo do its thing. And obviously the same thing's going on in the House of Representatives. Anyway, Dennis, you and I this conversation was almost like sitting at the bar or sitting at the bagel shop, if you will. And maybe if I get up to Albany, we'll get a chance to do that. Denis Slattery, the Albany Bureau Chief of the Daily News. Listen, I know that you got to write about the state as much Bronx as you can. We want that, because then it gives me an excuse to have you here.
I will do my best. I promise you that. Thank you so much for having me.
And I hope it's good news from the Bronx. Like the unemployment rate just plummeted. What are you going to do? Anyway, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to go to Mosaic Mental Health, and we're going to talk about this very interesting and very important film that is going to be shown. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back.
STEM is everywhere. Like here, behind the scenes of The Walking Dead.
When we break down clothes, we tumble it with trisodium phosphate, rock salt, and dish detergent.
We stitched together images of our model and created a 3D set that could be walked through in a VR headset.
We're able to turn 12 walkers into 1,000 walker boards.
STEM can create new worlds on and off the screen. What will you make with STEM? Get inspired at shecanstem.com.
Found my heart out there in the open. Trees make you feel smaller. Can't help but get lost again.
Feel the beat of nature at a park or forest near you. Find a forest and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org.
¿Qué color? Perfecto, mijo. Gracias. Thank you. What's wrong, mijo?
Donating to a pet's medical care is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Hey, boss. Okay?
I said I'm fine.
Put me to bed, see you in the morning. With the first aid, Superman, but it wasn't on it. and we lost it.
Talk to me.
It's been really, really hard for me.
All right, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. And I'm thrilled to bring back with us. She's been on Bronx Talk before. We were just talking about it. She has not been on the Bronx Buzz, but she is the executive director of Mosaic Mental Health, Dr. Donna Friedman. Dr. Friedman, nice to have you with us.
Very nice to be here. Thank you so much.
So this is interesting. You sent me the material on it. Was this movie called The Sun, and you said there's a showing for it. So let's just talk about why this one got your attention and what your interest is in presenting it to us and to the Bronx.
Absolutely. So one of my board members went to school with a woman who is working with the screenwriter, Florian Zeller, and brought it to my attention because it has to do with a really, really important topic, and that is adolescent suicide. And I was very, very interested in seeing how he portrayed it. And very importantly, using it as a springboard to discuss how serious and important this topic is. It's the second leading cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds in the United States.
That is actually a remarkable statistic. I mean, it's remarkable when you think of all the evils and all the possibilities, horrible possibilities, airplanes, car accidents. I mean, I don't, and various illness and what. Should I ask you what number one is, or we don't want to go?
You know what? I'm not even sure.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious. But with all those other things, now, I really want to go firsthand with this. You see the threats of this and those same issues in your work at Mosaic Mental Health.
Absolutely. And you know, one
I'm
of the
so
things
sorry to
that's
hear that.
really important to understand is that this issue, it really doesn't discriminate. Children, young people from all walks of life are in this crisis. 20% of high school students overall have made had some kind of serious thoughts of suicide.
20%, 1 in 5.
1 in 5. And 9% have actually made an attempt. So we see this at our agency, we see this across the country, and it's just been exacerbated by COVID. And
Well, I was going to ask you why now, and I guess I'm going to presume that it's worse now than maybe it was in a
Yes.
few years ago. COVID, let's break it down. Obviously, the health, maybe the potential loss of a loved one, but all the other things. I think of the kids looking at screens for 2 years. That scares me, frankly.
Yeah. Well, there are two things that make teenagers uniquely vulnerable, and they are that developmentally their brains, the frontal lobe, has not been fully developed, and that doesn't develop until mid-20s. And so their judgment is not quite the same. They're more impulsive than adults. And then the other thing is that socially, their world is all about their friends and how they fit in. And the pandemic just made that so much worse.
And let me just interject one step further with that, because they're coming of age, so to speak. So if you're 15 or 14, maybe a little earlier for girls, then you're starting to wonder what's that about, and
Right.
all the pressures that are on there in the TV and the commercials and the availability of any visual that you can think
Exactly.
about, and it's all out there, and you still haven't kind of figured it out. I mean, we all went through it. And so I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean,
Well,
it makes total sense.
the misperception is that suicide is always due to depression. And in fact, low self-esteem is a very high indicator.
Even more than somebody who's clinically depressed.
About 50% of suicides are related directly to depression, but much of this with adolescents also has to do with low self-esteem.
So let's just get back to the film, and I want to show the trailer for it so people can get an idea. So you felt that this film explains basically what we've just talked about, and or illustrates it in a way that people can understand.
So it's an example of how parents, well-meaning parents, and these could be any parents. In this movie, it happens to be wealthy parents from New York City. The writer is actually from France. It could be a poor kid in the Bronx. It has to do with how grown-ups have a difficult time really understanding the depths of what is going on with their teenager, because by nature, they tend to withhold information, they tend to isolate, they tend to be trying to grow away from the family. And so
Right.
the film really is focused on a boy who is, struggling, and how the parents are trying to help him, trying to understand him.
This is something that I really we're going to show the
Yeah,
trailer and people will be able to see that. But the notion of the family's reaction, influence is something that I know you deal with, because you're not
right,
going to solve an individual, especially a teenager's problem, unless you figure out what's going on at home.
right.
And so this illustrates it. Okay, so it's The Sun. It is going to be, let's see, Monday the 9th at 7 p.m. at Regal Union Square on Broadway and 13th Street. We'll talk more about that. But here it is. And thank Dr. Donna Friedman and Mosaic Mental Health for pointing it out to us. The Sun.
What are you doing here? Nicholas hasn't been to school in almost a month.
I wanted to ask, how are you? Has something happened? You realize the school is talking about expelling you.
Can I live with you?
You said you don't feel very close to people your age.
Your other son, he needs you as well.
And you're at work all of the time. Has he been able to talk about the divorce?
I've tried to be there for you. I've tried to give you strength. What's going on? Are you on drugs? You think you can just live your life doing whatever you feel like?
I don't know what's happening to me. I feel like a complete failure.
I wasn't there for him.
There used to be so much joy in our family.
You give these big speeches about life, and then you abandon us.
I have the right to reinvent my life!
Hello, son. You came to tell me what a good dad you are? What do you want? Applause?
That's my little boy. I can't give up on him.
It's the I saw the trailer previously, but I kept a little distance from it. It's a little hard for me to do this segment the rest of the way. Um, it's incredibly well done. Let's put it that way. I mean, I know that you deal with a lot of materials that come through and instructional videos and everything else, but this really brings it home. Um, for people who are raising teenagers and are maybe watching us now or have the opportunity, why should they see it? What do they get out of it?
There's a couple of really important things, and suicide and depression and anxiety and vulnerability are all things that young people are susceptible to, especially with access to the internet and the kinds of communications that are happening between teenagers. And so
Yep.
it's really to start a conversation about what do we do if we think our kid is in trouble, to listen to the professionals when they tell us that we have been doing this for a really long time, and as painful as it is to hospitalize your child or to do some of the things that we recommend, that it really is important to listen and to work with us, and very importantly that you know we need to encourage everyone to ask for help, and we need funding to be able to provide the help. So it's
Okay,
complicated.
I get that pitch for sure, and obviously there's been a lot of talk about mental health in the news. We have many local stories that we could probably have a dialogue about that as well.
Exactly.
I got two things that I want to respond with. Number one is just a simple word, which you deal with every day: parenting, and because the situation that's portrayed there, as we could tell, that child didn't get that way from nowhere. And if the parents were divorced, and that does happen, parenting is a big thing. So that's my first thing. And I know you agree because you deal with it every single day. So that's something else. And parents can go see it. The other thing, which was fascinating to me, and I pointed it out to you, that HBO Max has a program or a movie called so-called my so-called high school rank, and that attempts to take a look at the pressures on teens from the school's point of view, where they're pressurized to try to get to college, maybe in some cases without the resources, maybe in some cases without the grades, maybe in some cases without the social skills. You take that youngster and put them in a family that has other significant issues, and you have a cauldron.
Right. And I think that there are many different recipes for this unfortunate outcome that we need to pay attention to. This film just shows one, and there are many. But the most important piece here is that we recognize that it doesn't always look to be what we think of. You don't
Right.
have always tons of acting out beforehand.
All right, Dr. Friedman, we gotta run. The Sun, right? It is playing. I'll give all the particulars. It's playing Monday, January 9th at 7 p.m. at Regal Union Square. You can contact Mosaic Mental Health to find out more. You can go online and find out about it. And is it going to be shown again, or this is the one show?
No, this is a screening.
A screening.
And so I'm inviting people, if they want to come, and they need to RSVP to the Sun Mosaic at gmail.com. And that's a screening. And on the 20th of January, it's going to be nationally in
Great.
theaters.
Okay. We do got to run. Dr. Donna Friedman,
Okay.
thank you so much for
Thank you.
everything. I'm going to take a deep breath and get over it and be able to go about my my evening. And we do appreciate your presenting it to us. And we hope people, especially parents, will get out there and understand what it's about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that will do it for the Bronx Buzz. And you know what happens. We want to thank, of course, Denis Slattery and Dr. Friedman. We'll see you next week. Good night.